So now I get to introduce our keynote speaker. So when we set out to learn more about social mobility and poverty and opportunity in America, I kept hearing this name, Richard Reeves. So I looked him up, I read some of his stuff, I watched this incredible video that some of you have seen, just Google Richard Reeves Legos. And I called him, and the hour that Richard gave me on the phone that day was astonishing. I learned and I laughed and I thought, we are bringing this guy to New Hampshire. Richard V. Reeves is a senior fellow in economic studies and policy director of the Center on Children and Families at Brookings. As you see in the program, his CV includes positions with the UK's Deputy Prime Minister, Demos, the Work Foundation, and the Ministry of Welfare Reform. Richard is a widely published essayist and author, and he contributed to a superb paper by Brookings and the American Enterprise Institute called Opportunity, Responsibility, and Security. It's a tangible blueprint for action that was written by some of the nation's leading progressives and conservatives. Just the idea of R's and D's and independents working together in these polarized times makes me almost giddy with hope. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you for a doubly warm welcome to Richard, because as much as he's looked forward to being with us, something even bigger than speaking in New Hampshire happened to him this week. On Tuesday, Richard became an American citizen. Welcome, Richard Reeves.
Wow, that was quite an introduction, thank you. Usually I have to apologize for the fact that I talk about class and inequality to American audiences with this accent. And usually what I do is I justify it by saying we know a lot about class where I come from. I say I have a green card. I say my wife's American. I say my kids are American. I say I live here. I say I was born on the 4th of July. All of which is true, but now I get to say, and I'm a US citizen too. So that's great. I got there too. And I'm going to try, I have lots of charts because I'm from Brookings. So we can't travel without a massive PowerPoint of charts. But I'm going to get through my presentation a little bit more quickly than we planned because I really don't want to cut too much into the time for Q&A. I think that will be probably our richest time together. So please, I apologize in advance for the fact that A, I may really skip through some stuff here quickly. I'm happy to go back to it, and B, that I may do it more quickly than I would otherwise like, but I want to cover the ground. But I'm really inspired by the way that the previous speakers have kind of introduced their motivation and kind of why they're here. And I think it's really important that all of us, perhaps especially those of us who claim to be scholars trying to do objective work, are really honest about our own motivations. It's not a coincidence that we end up working on the things that we work on. And for various reasons, probably to do with my parents' backgrounds and my own childhood, I've always had a strong moral conviction that a society in which birth is destiny is morally wrong. A society in which you inherit your status is morally wrong. I was raised by parents who were fiercely anti-monarchist for reasons that I can't even remember, but I remember my father from a working class background. Just the thing that really upset him most about our country was the royal family, and it doesn't really make any sense except that it fits with this idea of, look, you earn your place in society, you work for your status in society, no one tells you who you can or cannot be. There's a phrase that I've escaped from in my old country, which is, you need to know your place, right? Parents say to their kids, you need to know your place, learn your place. One of the things I love about the promise of America is that people don't say that to you. People shouldn't say that to you. They should never say it to you, because here, it's not about knowing your place, it's about taking your place. It's about making your place. It's about earning your place. And I was asked to write an essay about what does it mean to be American as I approach this moment of becoming a US citizen myself. And I really thought hard about it and read around it and wrote some of it in the Horatio Alger essay that some of you may have seen. And it came back to me when I had my Oath of Allegiance ceremony this week, 68 of us from 35 countries, all of whom trooped next door immediately to register to vote on the very last day we could do that. from Afghanistan, from Ethiopia, from Iraq, from all around the world. And it was kind of a big moment for me, but honestly I have a green card and my family are American and so on. But you watch an Afghan woman with her baby in her arms taking the oath, and I defy you not to have tears in your eyes. It's quite something. And what you can see, then you get the Obama message and the video and this sense of, you're American now, you can be whoever you want. Americans have their kids wear T-shirts saying future president. And it's not ironic. Right? You can't do future king. we know it's going to be. And so my motivation is around this kind of sense of independence and self-creation. And I was asked to summarize what I thought being American was, and I thought actually at some level it can be captured in the following phrase: she's really made something of herself. Or he's really made something of himself. And I think almost in those very few words you capture something quite essential. I was very moved by your story. She's really made something of herself. He's really made something of themselves. The raw materials of our own success don't come from elsewhere, although we all need help and assistance. They come from ourselves, and then we make it. So people talk about being a self-made woman or a self-made man in quite a glib way, but in some ways the essence of Americanism is that it's a self-made nation of self-made people. When Jefferson was drafting the Declaration of Independence, his first draft didn't say that every man is born equal. It said every man is born equal and independent. And that was edited out of subsequent drafts. But equal and independent. And so right there from the beginning was this notion of individual independence and the possibility of rising. And that's one of the reasons why I'm drawn to America, always have been, and one of the reasons why I work on the issue of intergenerational social mobility. Because the idea that it is more the case that a kid born poor will stay poor in America than in the UK, that the transmission of status from one generation to the next is greater in the US than in the UK, should give everybody in this room pause. The myth of mobility and Horatio Alger and all of that is a very comforting one, especially for those of us who convince ourselves that we are high status because of our own merit. But the truth, and the data, some of the data I'll show you, is that it's very much harder than that. And that if anything, the US is becoming less mobile and some European countries are becoming more so. So I wanted to be clear about the motivation, and because I'm interested in intergenerational mobility, fundamentally I start with the child, and it seems as if many of the people in this room would agree with that. How do I start with the child? And so we started, I loved the starting with what do we have on our wall. Did I just kill this? Sorry, no. What we have on our wall, and I can't remember who started us off with that. Was it Maureen? Jamie, I think, started the ball rolling, right? So I have two on mine, one from a friend of mine who actually works in Congress, which is a Benjamin Franklin quote, which is, "What good shall I do this day?" Lovely quote. And next to it, above the coffee machine, I have, "Coffee makes everything better." So that's how I start my day. I'm going to get into my presentation, but before I do that, I obviously want to thank Dick and the Foundation for inviting me. I want to congratulate you on the new plan and on the authentic commitment that you have to this cause. But I also, rather than thanking all the other people at the top, I want to particularly thank those who've made it very easy for me to be here. Stuff that's not seen, stuff that you only notice when it goes wrong, but isn't often. So I'd like to thank Kristen Olivieri, I don't know if I got your name right, but who's doing the tech stuff, and particularly Jennifer Squires, who has done a huge amount of administrative support for me. So I'd like to, if you wouldn't mind putting your hands together to thank those two people, that would be nice. Yeah. And all the other important bigwig people on the working groups and all that blah-de-blah. They get thanked enough, right? So I'm going to do some things very, very quickly. I'm going to very briefly outline the Brookings AI report that I was privileged to be a member of. And I think, as Dick said, just the fact that people can kind of find ways to compromise, can sit in rooms together, and can listen to each other without assuming the worst of each other. Assuming that even if we disagree very passionately, we do not think that we are badly motivated in what we're trying to do. I'm going to very quickly run through some evidence on mobility and what are the big barriers to upward mobility in the US. A tiny bit about a model, which is similar to the model that you're using, called the social genome model. And then we're going to go to the kind of Q&A. And as I said, I'm going to try not to make this too opinionated, because we can get into kind of opinion in the Q&A and make it more sort of factual. I will, however, start with one opinion and then try to to move into facts, which is when we talk about the opportunity gap, the uncomfortable fact is that very many of us are on the right side of that gap, and our kids are on the right side of that gap. And as you've seen from the charts already, and you'll see from mine, what you're seeing is a pulling away at the top, a pulling away of those with college degrees. Those who have higher incomes, more power in the labour market are doing better, and they're leaving everybody else behind. And so if you're serious about our kids, not my kids, then that might take us to less comfortable places. It might mean that actually it's not just everyone wins here. It might mean that we have to make some difficult choices. It might mean, dare I say it, a tiny bit of sacrifice on our parts, whether that's financial or whether that's about the way we think about the way we zone our neighbourhoods, who we live with, who we spend time with, and who our kids go to school with. And so if we're very, very, very serious about our kids, we should think very hard about the balance that we'll all feel between wanting the best for ourselves and the best for our kids and our collective responsibilities for a better society. And so when we're thinking about what kind of school districts to have, we talked a bit about this at dinner last night, what kinds of admissions areas to have, what kinds of density zoning to have in the neighbourhoods that we live in, we should just be aware that it's not always going to be the case that what's in the best interest of other people's kids are automatically in our own best interest too. Maybe we have to give a little to get a little, and that's where the conversation becomes a little bit less comfortable. So I'll leave it at that for now. I'm going to move on to the Brookings AI report. I think actually, can you hear me? Is this on? This is the Brookings AI report. We started by trying to agree what our shared values were before getting into policies. People usually start in the wrong place by saying, are you for or against pre-K? What do you think about family planning? Wrong place to start. Start with, look, where are our values? Where can we agree about values? And this is where we ended up. And of course, some people put more emphasis on one than another. And this is the basic message of the report, which is poverty has declined. Was the war on poverty successful? Kind of, is the answer, I think. Economic mobility, which I'll talk more about, is stuck too low. Too many people get stuck in poverty. You're born in poverty and you stay there. That's a fundamental problem. That is what drives almost everything that I do, which is this problem of intergenerational stickiness at the bottom. And that these are three of the problems that we face with poverty and mobility. What's happening in the labour market, work, meaningful jobs, family composition, we've already heard a bit about that, and education. Those are the three that we decided to focus on. And in some ways, all three of those are getting worse and fueling the opportunity gaps. And we then offered some bipartisan solutions on each of them. So I'm going to very quickly do this. So these are the poverty rates for everyone in the middle, with female-headed households at the top, and they are, because of the way the data is collected, overwhelmingly single parents, and then older people at the bottom. What you see is actually there's been a dramatic improvement in poverty rates for older people, largely as a result of public policy. Turns out that if the government gives money to people who don't have money, they get less poor. That does kind of work. But you also see that there are still very high poverty rates, and especially those for female-headed households with children. So still 40% poverty rates there. This is wage inequality. I'm going to skip again through these and I'll say what I think they say, and we can always kind of come back to them, which is how you see just the wage gap has grown. So that's the 95th percentile to the 10th. So the people at the bottom of the labour market, all the top. This is just showing you essentially how, from an index of 0, what's happened to wages since the beginning of the 1980s. What you see is there's huge inequality in the labour market. So one of the real driver of income inequality on this side is wage inequality, because that's the way most of us get our income. This is men. This is women. I always have to put the women chart on as well. Not all my colleagues do, but one of the big shifts in the labour market is, of course, many, many more women working. Their wages have on average gone up. Not to the levels of men yet, but you'll see that among women's wages too, significant wage inequality. And though I won't show the chart, what then happens is that the men with the highest wages typically marry the women with the highest wages, put them together into a high-income household. So those separate wage figures would be one thing if all the high-earning men were with the low-earning women and vice versa. That's not how it works, and it's getting less like that. It is now much more likely we'll marry someone with similar level of education and therefore similar earning power to ourselves. There's less cross-class marriage than there used to be. So we concentrate our advantages. Now, this is family patterns. This is births outside marriage by the education level of the mother since 1970. And you can see, so the people who didn't even get a high school degree at the top, you're now up to 2/3 of the kids born to those mothers is outside marriage, down through the various levels of education to those with college degrees, which has gone up, but it's gone up from a very low base to still pretty low. So still less than 1 in 10. That's not nothing. But essentially, the odds of having a child outside marriage are massively correlated with your level of education. And the gap, this is a classic Putnam-Scissors chart, the gap along class lines in terms of non-marital births is huge. One wonky caveat is that over time, the nature of these groups has changed because high school graduation rates have gone up hugely. So there's a compositional effect there. Those who might worry about that, you'd be right to worry about it, but the pattern is clear. This is family structure. So this is women. The reason we always do women is because those are the ones we can catch in the surveys and get the data for. So this is kind of, okay, you're a 35-year-old woman. What's your life like? Who are you living with from 1970 across to 2010? And what you can see is that in 1970, almost 4 in 5 women in 35 were married with children. That's what you did. You were married with children. That's now down to half. And you'll see a significant increase in the number who don't have children or are single with children. So the nature of the shape of the American family has changed really quite significantly in the last 30, 40 years. We all know that, but here's the data. So what do we do? Okay, I warned you it would be quick. I apologize. So on family, the Brookings AI report, here's the deal we struck. We should promote marriage. Charles Murray, who's like the right-wing equivalent of Bob Putnam, says the problem with the elites in this country is that they don't preach what they practice. Because we're all getting married and staying married and providing family stability and all those good traditional things, but we feel very, very reluctant to judge other people. That's what Charles Murray says. And we should basically be all in. Robert Dorr, who spoke in Chicago, who was on the AEI side, huge advocate of promoting marriage. So the plan was a big social marketing campaign, government funded, to just say, get married before you have kids. My own view, and I can say this publicly, is that I don't think that that's going to be the most successful policy going forward. I don't think there's too much harm in trying it. I think the evidence of marriage promotion policies is pretty weak, but guess what? We're trying to do a deal here. We're trying to make something happen here. And if we all just stay in our trenches and just say, well, we're just going to do what I care about, right? We'll never get anywhere. So in the spirit of the conservatives who are on the group who genuinely believe that we can promote marriage and that marriage is a foundation stone for raising kids well, and you'll see some of the evidence I'm about to produce, then okay. I actually put more emphasis on delayed responsible childbearing, access to family planning, and particularly effective forms of contraception. My view is it's unintended pregnancies that are doing the damage, and Bob Putnam's book is full of them. All these books are kind of full of them, right? And you know, it's just like always just the ambiguous ways in which some of the children come into the world, and the complex ways in which they do that. It's not surprising perhaps their outcomes are not as good. For my money, I think what's happening in the US for marriage is a signal that we decided to have this kid together within our relationship and try and make it work. It's a signal of the commitment. It's also a good way to pool your income. Economically, it still makes sense. Parenting. So we heard about Head Start as a kind of early intervention, but I'm also very interested in some of the home visiting programs, and I think the evidence for home visiting is, if anything, slightly stronger than for pre-K, because some of the pre-K is not high quality enough, but actually helping parents to do parenting skills, particularly in those first 2 years. Pre-K is very late. Pre-K is really late, particularly given what we know about those first 2 years of development. And a lot of parents, as one of the speakers just said, if you don't know. And so providing some help. Again, a lot of people on the left get queasy about that, right? So we try just to go where the evidence is. And my view is that unless we're feeling uncomfortable with some of the work we're doing, we're probably not doing very good work. If the only stuff we say and the only stuff we find fits with our priors, fits with what we already thought, we're probably not doing very good work. Because the truth is that the world is never like that. So as you'll see, the evidence on marriage is quite strong, and I find that as a recovering European liberal, quite difficult. But my difficulty with it is not the test of whether it's true. All right? It's the evidence that we should do. So let's start with what's the end, promoting kids' life chances, making kids' lives better, and let's go find out what's affecting their lives. And if I don't like the results, well, tough on me. Right? We're not here to kind of make myself feel politically comfortable. We're here to help kids. And that's true on left and right. And then skill development, family involvement, and employment in young men. Again, it's a big issue, and we don't all agree about this, but actually kind of there is evidence, I think, that the current bar that's being set for what it means to be a husband and a father is still set pretty high, and it's set in some ways in reference to the labour market of the past. And that's beaching quite a lot of men, because they can't access the kinds of jobs that their fathers could, not with the levels of skill they've got. And so if you hold them to old standards, and of course you don't want to marry them, so what do they do? And I think that is an important question. And I think that our gender roles and parenting roles are way, way behind the realities of the modern labor market and the expectations of both men and women. We have a traditional model of the family in a modern labor market, and men are being beached in particular as a result. So I agree with all of them. Contraception, again, wow, this was a really interesting argument on the Brookings AEI thing. Really, really interesting. But I'm a huge advocate, along with my colleague Belle Sawhill, of people having more access to more effective contraception. Here we're talking mostly about women, particularly in the early stages, although, by the way, as an aside, how come that female sterilization is covered by the ACA but not male, when it costs a sixth as much and is way safer? Anyway, I've written about that too. So this is comparing, this is how many years that you've been sexually active, what form of contraception you're using, and how likely you are to get pregnant. So you've got 63% chance of getting pregnant if you're relying on a condom. Now, it's over 10 years. You can see it goes up. But the longer you use it, so if you, and the average American woman now is sexually active for 10 years before she gets married, roughly. So it's a decade of having sex before you get married. And then if you were being mean, you'd say, and then it stops. So that's roughly the period in which the average American woman is sexually active. What kind of contraception you're going to use? Well, you're going to use that. You're going to use pills, better than condom, obviously. But then you get down to IUDs. We don't have patches or hormonal letters on here, whatever. But I find it hard to find a more startling chart, to be honest. And yet we make it quite hard for people to get access to these forms of contraception. Sometimes it's costly, it's bureaucratic, there's resistance to it. There's all kinds of moral judgments that are made about it. I realize it's a complex issue. But you know what? One thing we could do is stop the number of kids who are born ambivalently or accidentally in this country. The US is a very modern society, as many ways. One of the ways in which it's not so modern is in its attitudes to sex and contraception. People are going to keep having sex long before they get married. The question then is, are we going to help them make sure that doesn't result in an accidental pregnancy or an accidental birth? Yes or no? That's a difficult conversation, but unless we have it, then I think a lot of this stuff is going to be so much harder. This is a cheap and effective way to help create family stability and more planning. This is work now, moving on to work. This is employment. And what you kind of see is that actually the employment rates for different groups are basically flat since the 80s. And that's historically, that's unusual. The US has seen growing labor market participation. The bottom, the line that's going down at the bottom is young black men. So black men under the age of 25 are seeing their labor market participation rates dropping very quickly. What time is it? How long have I got? 11:55. So let's just stop now. Okay. Well, I've got to get the balance right now, I think, because we want Q&A as well. And you can all read. So I won't feel the need to read it all out. But around work, here are some of the things that we suggested. I think the two I'd pick out, the middle two, which is we agreed there should be a higher minimum wage. We didn't specify a level, but higher than the current level. But we also thought that there could be more work requirements attached to certain welfare benefits, such as food stamps. Again, not everyone agrees with everything in the report, but you know what? If you want to get anything done in a divided group or a divided government, you've got to compromise. So that's where we ended up. And it's very hard for the Conservatives on the group, by the way, to agree to a higher minimum wage. That's a big deal for them. This shows the relationship between education and wages. It simply makes the point that for those who don't have education, you're not going to earn very much anymore. The days in which you could actually earn without skills are gone. So education and wages are hugely related, which is related to income. So what do we do? Again, I won't go through all of this, but I would strongly emphasize the point about early years education, which we've already heard about. We agree with that. The evidence is strong. And then post-secondary. I think that community colleges, vocational training are especially important. The slight obsession with the four-year college degree is unhelpful in some ways now. There need to be alternative pathways. It would be good if we thought about them as appropriate for our own kids as well. The problem with vocational training is that people tend to think it's for other people's kids. But if we can get past that and make it more inclusive, that would be good. Right now, I think actually it's backfiring, that too many kids think, I've got to get a four-year college degree, so they end up going to a bad college, they get into debt, they may not graduate, it's a poor quality degree. And that's the worst of all worlds. And by the way, that is the college debt problem. There is not a college debt problem across the board, and there is not a college debt problem for kids from affluent homes. No matter how much they're complaining about it. I don't care. You might have $60,000 worth of college debt, but if you graduated from a good college, that is a great investment. You're going to be fine. Stop complaining. And especially stop complaining if you've moved to San Francisco about how expensive it is. Because you didn't have to do that. Or New York. Oh my God, I've got all this debt and I live in Brooklyn. No, I went to Princeton and now I'm in Brooklyn and I'm really shut up. Okay. Here's my Horatio Alger quote. I like this from Horatio Alger, terrible writer, although even in 2000 he was like the 4th best-selling American author of all time. In 2000, ahead of Danielle Steele, I think, or maybe just behind. Anyway, he's even worse writer than Danielle Steele, but he did say this. And I like this because this was in Ragged Dick, one of his famous books. This is the American dream, I think, in this free country, that's important. Poverty is no bar to man's advancement, it's gendered, of course. So you're born poor, and then what do you have to do? Save your money, buy your books, and determine to be somebody. Financial capital, human capital, and aspiration. Pretty good. That's not bad, Horatio. Now I'm going to do mobility. This is a quintile transition matrix, an intergenerational quintile income transition matrix. We make these all the time at Brookings. The days fly by. This is like, and basically what it's showing you is you're born poor, you're quite likely to be stuck poor. This is the best looking picture you're going to see, by the way. Most of them show worse figures than this, depending on the data. But you've got, you're at least 4 times as likely to be stuck in poverty if you're born in poverty as to raise to the top, Horatio Alger style. And the same other side, if you're born in the top. So these are income quintiles. So I've split the population up into equal size chunks, 20% in each, and called them quintiles. Left to right is where you're born, and then as we go up, where you end up. So this is a way of saying, at roughly the same age as your parents, where do you end up on the ladder? Think of this as an income ladder. What rung were you born on? What rung do you end up on? And how much movement is there around? This doesn't tell me that much because there's the whole US population, so I've got a lot of diversity within there. But I just want you to understand that concept, right? So this is telling me that of the kids who are born poor, 36% of them stay poor. Of the kids who are born rich, 30% of them stay rich. As I said, most people find higher numbers than those. Okay? Why? 4 reasons. Family, education, race, geography. Family. Now, I got a pointer. How does this work, please? Is it A? Okay. Let's do this one. Right. This is mothers who are never married. You're raised by a mother who wasn't married at all through your childhood, right? And you're born poor, 50% chance of staying poor. Half the kids born to a mother who doesn't marry, who is born poor to a mother that never marries, stay poor. 5% get to the top. Go across to continuously married mothers, which is the next one here. 17% of those born to a mother who stays married throughout their childhood stay in poverty. 19% get to the top. So even if you're born poor, if your mother is married throughout your childhood, you're more likely to end up at the top of the ladder than stuck at the bottom. This is descriptive data. The question is why? What's going on there, right? About income, it's about stability, it's about parenting, all kinds of things. We can get into that in Q&A. But them's the facts. So that's one thing, family structure. And then there's the ones whose mother's married part of the time. Education. If you're born in the bottom, it should say quintile. Born in the bottom quintile, and you don't have a high school degree, 54% chance of staying there and 1% chance of getting to the top. You ain't going to be Horatio Alger if you don't finish high school. College graduates. Born at the bottom, you're a college graduate, 16% chance of being stuck at the bottom, 20% chance of going to the top. Nothing propels you up like a 4-year college degree, right? I've just said we're too obsessed with that, and I'll come on to that. But nothing propels you up like that, okay? So it completely transforms your life chances. It doesn't take away income, though, by the way. I mean, look at the kids born at the top without high school. Without even finishing high school, they still do okay, right? 14% chance there, 16% fall to the bottom. Whereas the kids who are poor and get a college degree, 16% chance of being poor. So your chances of ending up poor are exactly the same if you were born poor but got a 4-year college degree, or you were born rich and didn't even finish high school. So let's not pretend for a moment that education takes income away. But the bigger problem is this. And these are slightly different to Dick's charts. We need to kind of figure out what's going on here. But these are from Sue Dunarski's, and I think they're just a different cohort. So the blue line is people who are born between 61 and 64, and the red line is those who are born between 79 and 82, so ridiculously young people. And then this is their college graduation rate, their chance of getting a 4-year college degree based on whether they're born into the to bottom quartile. By the way, education researchers use quartiles, economists use quintiles. It's a nightmare. Why? Anyway, so this tells me that in the old days, 5% of poor kids got a college degree. Now 9% of poor kids get a college degree, right? In the old days, ignore the dotted line. In the old days, 36% of rich kids got a college degree. Now 54% of rich kids get a college degree. Okay. There are two ways to interpret this graph. Look, we've doubled the number of poor kids getting a college degree. Yay. Go me. The other way to interpret it is the gap has widened between the top and the bottom. And the dotted lines actually just tell you if the line carried on in line with the first three quartiles, how many rich kids would be going? If the line went straight, that's what actually happens. So the inflection point is up here. So the inequality is growing, but the main reason it's growing is because more of the kids at the top are going to college than before. It is now the norm. Affluent kids get a four-year college degree. It's a norm, and it's not elsewhere. So yes, it's a fantastic upward mobility, but look how few of those kids actually get it. Fewer than 1 in 10 will get a four-year college degree. So we cannot rest everything on that. Race. I have to do this, and then I'll probably skip. You can't escape race. Obviously, you're in a relatively white state, but the data on race is unavoidable. I only have black and white. We don't have enough Hispanic data yet. If you're born poor and you're black, you have a 51% chance of remaining poor. If you're born poor and you're white, you have a 23% chance of remaining poor. You're twice as likely to be stuck in poverty if you're black than if you're white. More striking in some ways if you are black and you're born in the middle-class Americans, middle-income Americans. You have 70% chance of being downwardly mobile. You're most likely to be lower on the rungs than your parents compared to the whites who only have a 34% chance. So twice as likely to be stuck in poverty, but twice as likely to fall out of the middle class as well. This is one of the biggest contributory factors to the lack of mobility in the US, is the experience of black Americans in particular. Geography, massive variation across the country. You're up here, right? Where are we? No, I'm not entirely sure, so I'm just going to... So the geography tells us there's like huge differences. You'll recognize the map, and the south and the industrial northeast. The darker the color, the worse the mobility. The less your chances of rising up the ladder. Newer places, more mobility. Utah does incredibly well. Deep South does incredibly badly. Now, this man produced that chart, Raj Chetty, and he finds these are the things that correlate with lack of mobility. I've already mentioned most of them. Residential segregation, which I alluded to earlier, seriously damages mobility for some of the reasons that we can talk about. And I was going to do this, the social genome model, but I think I'll probably, we've got to stop when soon, right? All right, but I'm trying to decide how to use my 5 minutes. Okay, this is very similar to the Dick's life stage model, but we've developed this with Bell Sawhill, which has 5 life stages and benchmarks of success. And the idea of this is that we then have clear success measures at each life stage. These are the success measures. So, and these are contested for sure, but they're based on the evidence. So, what does it mean to be born successfully? Like a weird thing to think about. But you're born, you have a normal birth weight, because that's quite predictive, to a non-poor married mother with at least a high school diploma. So that's a good start, right? That would be the ideal start. Adolescence, I'll skip some of these, or we can read them. Getting out of adolescence successfully, you've got to graduate high school with a GPA of 2.5 and not have been convicted of a crime or become a parent. That's success, right? You might think these are quite low, by the way, but I'll show you the numbers in a minute. Adulthood is your middle class by middle age. Middle class is defined as 300% of the federal poverty line. Middle age is defined depressingly as 40. But that's where you are. And so those are our success measures, right? We can argue about them forever. We have argued about them forever. This is how many people pass them and how many people who fail on one go on to the next. I call this the nothing succeeds like success chart. And I'll just spend a minute on this and I'll probably then wrap. So, family formation. You've seen what I've described what that is. 55% of kids clear that hurdle. 55% of kids are born into that kind of family, whereas 45% who are not. 57% clear our early childhood gaps, which it's a 1 standard deviation above the mean. For childhood development, and so on. Now, these highlighted ones, what we've done here is we've said, look, if you clear this hurdle, what are your chances of going on to clear the next hurdle? 76%. So of those who clear that hurdle, 76% go on to clear that hurdle. Of those that miss that hurdle, 41% go on to clear that hurdle. 24% who cleared that. So you can see they'll all add up. So what I'm seeing is, given your success there, what are your chances of success here, right? And you can see there's a strong chance that if you succeed at that stage, you'll succeed at the next stage. So nothing succeeds like success. However, you also do see quite a bit of moving around. So the challenge is, how do you keep people on track, but also how do you get them back on track when they go off? Because some people will. Almost no one clears everything. So getting back, so 46% who didn't start in that kind of quotes perfect family situation, they've caught by early childhood, they're on track. Why? What happened? All right. And so understanding how we kind of help what are the on-ramps back to the success sequence is just as important as how we start. So we don't want early years determinism, which is that's all done by 5. That's not true. All right. But we do need to recognize that success is cumulative. So this is the model that we're working on. I guess this is probably where I'll end, because the work from Chetty, our own work, shows that lots of the things that impact a kid's chances of being upwardly mobile, which is what I'm all about, a lot of those are local in their nature. So the reason why you've got less upward mobility in Denver will be different to New Hampshire. And understanding your own opportunity structure and the variation within New Hampshire, and it'll be different in different parts of New Hampshire, and understanding that and just getting the facts right is really important, because we all have our priors. Everyone goes in saying, oh, it's all about jobs, or if only people got married, or whatever. Well, let's go and find out. So I've done work in Colorado. One of the success measures, they've used this model, success measures is high school graduation rates, as you can see, and really doing badly in some areas. So we dug right into it. It turns out that it's Hispanic boys not graduating high schools in particular suburbs of Denver. Right? That's really driving like half the problem. Hispanic boys in about 3 schools for Denver. I'm exaggerating, but I don't know, and don't quote me on those numbers. But that's really interesting to know, because then when you're thinking about a policy intervention, don't just have a Denver-wide, why don't you all graduate high school? Hey? Have a specific policy that's tailored to the problem you've identified. And you don't know in advance. So it might be that unintended pregnancy is not a problem here, or it is there but not there. It might be you don't have a race gap. It might be that early years is great. I don't know. You're finding out. You'll know. And actually basing what we do on our evidence is hugely important. So I think this point in your new plan about having measures of success is hugely important. Unless we know what success looks like, unless we'll know whether we've succeeded, we're not really saying anything at all. We're just all using nice words with each other, right? About opportunity and promise. The fact that you're actually developing clear success measures to say, are we succeeding? Yes. It forces the conversations, how do we know if we're succeeding or not? Then it becomes an empirical question as to what will get us there. And so for example, if I'm interested in the early years development of kids or how they do in terms of their schooling or whatever, if I'm presented with evidence that actually marriage causally seems to predict the better chance of those kids, and I'm convinced there are policies that might move the needle on that, I am forced by the logic of my own position to support those policies, and so I should. So if we're evangelical about the ends, we should be able to be a bit more agnostic about the means. Otherwise, what tends to happen is we get deeply political about the means. You're for or against pre-K. What do you think about the contraception stuff, whatever? Which is very unhelpful. We should be led by the evidence to what works and what counts. And that will lead, wherever we start, I guarantee we're going to feel uncomfortable with some of the results. I guarantee it. And if we don't, then we probably haven't done good work, and we'll never find common ground with people that we disagree with. Georgia O'Keeffe. Lake George. She hated it, apparently. Why have I put her up? Because she said the job of an artist was to do this: select, simplify, amplify. I think that's our job too. Select the thing we care about. What do we really care about here? Let's really narrow it down. Is it the upward mobility chances of kids born poor? If so, great. Let's really get hard-headed about it, because if you start talking about inclusion and opportunity, and before you know it, you're like, yay, let's have everything. Wouldn't everything be great, right? Got to be quite focused. So select, then simplify it. Really bring it down to something we can measure, and that we know when we're succeeding, and then amplify it. Then use every megaphone you've got, every institution you've got to say, we are going to, in this state or this town, going to do X by Y. And say it over and over again so people know you mean it. And say it loud enough that if you fail, you'll be in trouble. Commit yourself publicly to it. Select, simplify, amplify, and I'm thrilled that you seem to be doing that around opportunity. I'll stop. I have a website and a Twitter feed and a newsletter.